to use it. Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim Daf Nun Zayin. Today's daf is dedicated in honor of Batzalel Schwartz and Hadar Gushko and their families on the occasion of their wedding, which took place last night. Mazal Tov. Okay, we're going to get started with, we started yesterday at the bottom of Nevav. We're going to finish up the chapter Ezum Koman today with the Bechor, the maaser, and the Pesach. And we said, one of the things we said about them, so we started with that the blood is thrown on the altar, not poured. If we learned it from Dam Zevachim Yishafech, the maaser, and the Pesach, right? It's unclear. It doesn't say anywhere about the sprinkling of the blood in the Torah. We either learn it from Bechor, which is what our Mishnah did, because grouped them together and said the bloods are done the same way. So then it would be Zrika, because it says Zarku et Adam in the Bechor Pasuk. But Rabbi Yishmael, we saw, learned it differently. That was on Daf Lamed Zayin. They learned from Dam Zvechecha Yishafech, that general pasuk about pouring whatever blood is left of the whatever blood there is. It doesn't really say what they're talking about. It must be including wherever it wasn't mentioned. The blood should be poured, and then pouring is different, obviously. Than right, pouring is like pouring from a pitcher. Zrika is throwing, right, taking it in the bowl and going, right, standing at the bottom and just throwing it onto the wall. Then we said, there's only one matana, one placing of the blood, okay? And it has to just be, the only criteria is don't do it on that southeast corner where there's no yesod underneath. Right, we're not talking about the shirayim, the extras that go in the yesod. We're talking about when you throw the blood onto the altar, it has to be on a side where there's a yesod. So now the Gemara says, Va'ola gufa minala. Now this was learned out at the very end of yesterday's daf. It was learned out from Gzeira Shava between Ola and Bechor. They both say Zrika in the pasuk. So Zrika there with the Ola had to be connected to Yisod. Also here, where do we get the Ola? Ola gufa minalan. First question of today's daf. Dechtiva Yisod mizbach Ola. We already know this. There were 3 times where it mentioned that Yisod mizbach Ola, specifically in the Chatat offerings. But we learned that one of them is trying to tell you limed alolat chovash tuna Yisod, that the Ola needs Yisod. So now they say, wait a minute. If we're going to learn it from the Ola, why don't we learn it completely from the Ola? Meaning, the Ola offering, you do 2 blood placements that are really 4, meaning it gets to all 4 sides. So here, so it should also be 2 placings that are 4, not 1 placing. So how do we get that? That it's 1 and not the 2 that are 4. Amar Abaye, saviv ba'ola, saviv b'chatav. Remember how we got to the 4, right? The 2 that are 4, because it said saviv. You have to go around the altar, which means you have to get to all the sides. So it says saviv ba'ola, and it says saviv b'chatat. And therefore, what's our famous thing? You don't build a paradigm. You don't say a binyan av when you have it in 2 places. Because anytime you have it said in 2 places, you can't learn from there to another. However, there's machloket about that. So it says it by chatat, it says it by olah. From there, we don't learn. But that's only if you say you can't learn. But some people say 2 places you still can build a paradigm. Only 3 you can't. So the answer, have asham shlosha, because this also says by asham saviv. So shlosha v'dai emalamdim. Nobody thinks the 3, and therefore, by the way, shlamim also it said it. Okay, but they don't bring that one because we really don't need that. From there we learn, so far we got that you have to do the blood next to on the side where there's a yesod, and we learned that it doesn't have to be on all 4 sides. It only has to be 1 placing of the blood, and that we learned because the pasuk said zarku, and there was no reason to think it was any more than 1. And we're not going to learn from all the others because it's shnei ktuvim or shlosha ktuvim habeim ke'echad, and we can't learn from there. Okay, now we're going to start our big long sugya, which is going to take us almost till the end of the daf. What's going to happen in this sugya is a few things. We're going to start with a braita. It says a very simple halacha that we already know from the Mishnah, and you kind of say, okay, obvious. Well, I don't know why it's obvious, but that's what's going to be the whole discussion of the Gemara. And the Gemara is then going to bring, well, it's actually all in the braita. It's going to bring first, and I want to organize this for you so you don't get, it's a kind of long-winded thing and you could get kind of sidetracked. So I want to set it straight from the beginning. We're going to have a braita that says this halacha. Then we're going to have a story that on the day that Rabbi Yosi Hagelili, who was the Galilean, came to Yavne, to where when the Sanhedrin was in Yavne. It was the first day he gets there, and he starts causing trouble. Okay, sort of trouble. Not, I don't know if you call it trouble, but Rabbi Tarfon teaches this basic halacha that we just said, and he's going to start arguing with him with logical arguments. Then Rabbi Tarfon is not going to have any response anymore after a few back and forths, and Rabbi Akiva is going to take the place of Rabbi Tarfon and continue arguing with him. And Rabbi Akiva is going to bring a heikesh, and Rabbi Yosi Hagelili is going to disagree with his heikesh. He's going to convince Rabbi Akiva, but Rabbi Akiva is still going to stick by the halacha, even though he agrees with this. He's going to, okay, now. Then, okay, so what I want to explain is, first there was this debate between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Yosi Hagelili. Then Rabbi Akiva swaps Rabbi Tarfon. But then the real meat and potatoes of the discussion is going to end up being a debate after the debate ends there, a debate between Rabbi Akiva and his switch in position to be convinced partially by Rabbi Yosi Hagelili, and Rabbi Yishmael is going to hear this and go out against Rabbi Akiva. So it's then going to turn into this debate between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. So it like shifts who's arguing and what they're arguing about, but now you'll see it inside, and if you didn't follow everything, at least it'll somewhat help you get the framework, and we'll go through the framework again at the end. What they're really quoting is not that the kohenim eat it, but how long they can eat it for, 2 days and a night. So Tana Rabbanan, where do we get this from? So the Braita quotes a pasuk. Okay, Ubisaram, I'm going to start, by the way, sharing my screen now, and we're going to follow along with the study guide because that will be very helpful. Okay, just find it. Okay. Just a second. Okay. So we have to start with this pasuk. Bamidbar, chapter 18, verses 17 to 18. And that's about the Bechor, Ach Bechor Shur, or Kesev, or Bechor Ez, Lo Tifdeh, Kodesh Hem. Okay, they're sanctified. The firstborn animal that's born to you is sanctified. Etamam Tizrok Al HaMizbeach, Chalbam Taktir. We saw the pasuk yesterday. Ubesaram, next pasuk. And their flesh, okay, their meat. Yelecha will be for you. Who's for you? We're talking to the Kohanim. Will be for the Kohanim. Now the chazat nufa and the shok yamin are the breast and the thigh, which are given to the kohanim in a korban shlamim, and a peace offering. So it says here, these should be for you like the chazat nufa and the shok yamin l'chayiyeh. Okay, first of all, it says yeh l'cha and l'chayiyeh, totally repetitive, very unclear why. Okay, so the meat will be for you like the chazat nufa and the shok yamin, the same way you get okay, theoretically you could say the meat will be for you like that one is for you. It's still very redundant. Okay, anyway, the point being, what happens, this is the basic law of a Bechor. Firstborn animal has to go to the kohen. You sacrifice it and the meat goes to the kohen. Okay? If you can't sacrifice it because it's blemished, you also have to give it to the kohen, although that we're going to see later where they get that from. So now comes the big drasha. Okay, and then we're going to start with other arguments and end with this drasha, basically. There's a heikesh in this pasuk. Why is there a heikesh in the pasuk? Well, the bisaram of the Bechor, okay, the meat of the Bechor, is like the chazat nufa and the shok yamin, which basically means it's like a shlamim. Okay, now it's not really what the pasuk is saying, but they learn a heikesh here. There's the basar of the Bechor connected with something that is in the shlamim, that the breast and the thigh go to the kohen. Because remember, in a shlamim you get to eat all the meat as the owner of the sacrifice, except for the parts that have to go to the kohen. And these are two parts that specifically in a shlamim go to the kohen also, in addition to whatever else normally goes to the kohen. So now, the chazat tufa and the shok yamin, so kishak tuv the chazat v'shok shel shlamim. What's this heikesh? We're actually going to modify this heikesh later, okay? But right now, that's the way the Braita understands the heikesh. Mashlamim, now it's going to be obvious. Shlamim, peace offerings, are eaten. Nechalim, l'shnei yamim v'layla echad. You get 2 days and the night in between. Ach bechor ne'echal l'shnei yamim v'layla echad. So bechor also 2 days and the night in between. Okay, sounds simple. We have a heikesh. The pasuk talks about chazat nufa and shok yamin, which are laws unique to shlamim. Then it talks about Basar Bechor is like that. So, Basar Bechor is like that in other ways as well. Not just that it goes to the kohen, also that it's even for 2 days and 1 night. Okay, pretty simple. But comes the Gemara and says, or the Braita continues and says, Vizo she'ela neshala lefnei chachamim b'Keren b'Yavne. Okay, in Keren b'Yavne, which is the way they call the Sanhedrin or the study hall in Yavne. Bechor lekama ne'echal. The question was asked in the study hall in Yavne. How long can a bechor be eaten? Okay, this question was asked. Na Rabbi Tarfon v'amar. So Rabbi Tarfon gets up and says, and here we start our chart. Okay, well, actually, almost not yet. Says l'shnei yamim v'layla echad. Okay, simply answers the question. Yeah, bechor kama ne'echal, right? L'shnei yamim v'layla echad. This should be marked off as Tanaitic source. Sorry about that, but okay. So l'kama ne'echal. So hayasham. So he says shnei yamim v'layla echad. Hayasham talmid echad sheba lebeit Midrash b'fnei chachamim tchila. This was the first day Rabbi Yosi Hagelili showed up to the Beit Midrash in Yavne. Okay, first day he gets there, he starts up with Rabbi Tarfon. And Rabbi Yosi Hagelili Shemo, okay, and that's why it was his first day, because he was from the Galilee, which wasn't nearby. Amar lo Rabbi, minayin lecha. He says, what's your source, Rabbi Tarfon? And Rabbi Tarfon says, Amar lo bini shlamim kochim kalim, ubechor kochim kalim. So instead of bringing him this heikesh, Rabbi Tarfon gives him actually a logical answer. He says it's just pretty simple. Shlamim is kachim kalim, the light kind of kachim. Bechor is kachim kalim. Okay, so ma shlamim nechalim l'shneimim v'lay lechad. At bechor nechal l'shneimim v'lay lechad. So he compares it to shlamim, but not from this heikesh in the pasuk. He just says it's the same as shlamim because it's the same category. Amar lo Rebbe. So comes Rabbi Yosi Hagelili and says, Bechor matana kohen. Shlamim gets eaten by the owner. But Bechor is given as a gift to the kohen. What else is given as a gift to the kohen? The meat of the chatan and the asham, the sin and the guilt offerings. Okay, we're in this chart, on the second part of the chart, where Rabbi Yosi Hagelili says, it's much more similar to chatan and asham, because they're given to the kohen. So it's unclear, and this is why I didn't put it in here in the chart. Does Rabbi Yosi Hagelili really think that bechor is eaten for one day and one night? Or is he just playing devil's advocate? I'm not sure, and that's why I didn't want to fill in that Rabbi Yosi Hagelili actually holds that the bechor can only be eaten for one day and a night. I left it blank, but it's possible. I'm leaving that as an open question. He's constantly arguing for the case to say it's one night and a day, but it's not clear that he actually holds it in the bottom line, or is he just questioning the line of arguing and say, you're comparing it to shlamim, for that, for all intents and purposes, you compare it to chatan nasham. It's similar to that as well. So Rabbi Yishmael answers the obvious answer. If you're going to compare things, you're going to compare it to whatever it's more similar to. Now we're going to see that Rabbi Yosi Hagelili doesn't disagree. It's just each one disagrees about what it's more similar to. So mashlamim ein ba'in al chet af bechor eino ba'al chet. Right? When do you bring a shlamim? You decide voluntarily. I'm going to bring an offering. When do you bring a sin offering? Not voluntarily, only if you sin. What about bechor? Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't say that well. I was confusing two issues. Let's say it again. Shlamim doesn't come from a sin offering. It comes because you voluntarily want to bring one. Bechor, now actually it's not voluntary, and that's part of the issue, but it comes not for a sin. It's just your firstborn animals. All your male firstborn animals have to be brought as a sacrifice. So neither of them is associated with sin. And that's why he says it's much more intuitively similar to shlamim than it is to chatan and asha. And therefore, again, okay, therefore, 2 nights and a day. Amar lo Rebbe, nidon davar midaval, yoma davar midaval. I agree with you that we're going to learn it to something more similar. But I disagree with you about what it's more similar to. And now he's going to give 2 reasons why it's similar to chatan and asha. So we're now here where it says in the chart, number 1 and number 2. Okay? So what does he say? He says, chatat va'asha matana kohen, which he said before already, but now he's stressing it. He's saying, look, you think it's more similar, but it's true, it doesn't come for sin. But they're both gifts to the kohen, and the bechor is a gift to the kohen. The shlamim, the owners, get to eat it. And also, as I was saying before, chatat and asham are not voluntary offerings. You bring them because you have to. You sinned. Well, af bechor, you also bring the bechor because you have to. It's your firstborn animal. It has to go. So machataf asham. So therefore, since it's similar to that in 2 ways, well, machataf asham nechalim liyom echad. Af bechor nechal liyom echad. Okay, and therefore it must be yom echad. Okay. now Rabbi Tarfon has nothing left to answer. This is why I told you he leaves the discussion. So just to summarize, we have here logic versus logic. Which is it more similar to? Is it more similar to Shlamim? Is it more similar to Chatat and Asham? Back and forth. Rabbi Yosi Hagelili kind of ends with the upper hand. Well, kafatz Rabbi Akiva b'nistalek Rabbi Tarfon. That's how we know Rabbi Tarfon leaves. He literally leaves the room. But comes in Rabbi Akiva to take his place. Maybe then Rabbi Tarfon felt, okay, someone else is taking over the argument. I can leave. I have nothing more to say. Amarlo. And here comes the heikesh, which we saw before. Okay, we saw it in the Breita in the beginning, and then we kind of went back. But here's the heikesh. Okay, so ubesaram yelecha, right? Kechazeh hatnufa ukeshok yamin. So now we're down to the third section of this chart. So now, or is it fourth already? Yeah, fourth. Okay, so now, but the third part of the argument. Comes Rabbi Akiva, because there was two back and forths with Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Yosi Hagelili, and he says, "Hikishana katuv l'chazeh v'shok shel shlamim, ma shlamim ne'echalim liyom l'shnei yamim v'layla echad, af bechor ne'echal l'shnei yamim v'layla echad." Right, we keep going back to that mantra. Just like shlamim are eaten 2 days and 1 night, bechor is also eaten 2 days and 1 night, except that we're getting it from a heikesh here. Okay, we're comparing in that pasuk again. The basar of the bechor is like the chazeh atnufan, the shakemim, which is something that is known to be for a shlamim. Marlo, but wait, here's the reaction to this heikesh. And in the end, he's actually going to convince Rabbi Akiva of this. Marlo, he kashtiv l'chazeh v'shok shel shlamim. You want to say it's a heikesh to shlamim. Ani mikishol l'chazeh v'shok shel toda. But I can compare it to the chazeh and shok of a toda offering. Now, toda is a type of shlamim. And we're going to see soon how we learn that a toda also has the law of shok and chazeh. Okay, that also that has to go to the kohen. But let's put that aside right now. But what do we know about a korban toda? And the korban toda, it says in the pasuk very specifically, it's eaten for 1 day. You have to eat it that day, and you also get the night. But it has to be eaten that day. So he says, chazeh and shok, you say it means shlamim. I could say we could do it for toda. And there's a principle called tafasta meruba lo tafasta. If you try to take too much, you don't get anything, right? We always say that. It's a phrase. But what it also means halachically is if you have two options and one is more and one is less, go for the less one. So if you have this equal option, it could be shlamim, it could be toda, well then go with toda because it's less time that it can be eaten. So why don't we choose that one? So that's what Rabbi Yosi Hagelili, that's his counter. And therefore, he goes back to his argument. And then you could get to the conclusion that bechor is only eaten for the day and the night. So Rabbi Akiva actually agrees with his heikesh, and he says, you're right. We can make the heikesh to the toda, but I still disagree with you about the bottom line. And why is that? Now, if we go back to the original pasuk, I said the pasuk is very strange because it says, U'b'saram yelecha, the meat of the bechor will be for you, like the chazeh and the shok, licha yihiyeh, it will be for you. Now, what do you mean? You already said it will be for you. Why are you saying at the end it'll be for you? That's very strange. So comes Rabbi Akiva and says, I'll take it. The chazeh tufan shok we're going to go with the least. That's 1 day and a night. But once you say b'saram yelecha, you don't need lecha yeh. It's the same thing, just reverse order. But why do you need that extra pasuk? Those extra words. What it's saying is, this is for you, you get something extra, meaning, right? So the beginning of the pasuk says, the meat of the bechor is like chazeh tufan shokimim, meaning it's like toda. It only can be eaten for a day and a night. But then it says, it will be for you, meaning, oh, but you get some extra, you get an extra day. And therefore we'll let you eat it the next day. So that's the end of the argument between originally it was Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Yosi Hagelili. Rabbi Akiva took the place of Rabbi Tarfon. They finished the argument. So that's part one of this sugya. So really part two. Part one was the Breita, which says we have a heikesh to shlamim, okay, which is interesting because in the end, the heikesh isn't to shlamim. In the end, the conclusion from this section is the heikesh is really to toda, and we just add the extra day. We still get to the same conclusion. That's what's important to understand here. Rabbi Akiva disagrees with Rabbi Yosi Hagelili about the bottom line. Rabbi Yosi Hagelili, again, we don't really know what Rabbi Yosi Hagelili himself held. We just know what he was arguing for. And he basically, in the end, first he thinks it's logic. It's more logical to compare it to the chatat and the asham, which would be a day and a night. In the end, he says, the Rabbi Akiva comes back with, but there's a heikesh. He says, fine, I'll take that heikesh and I'll do the heikesh to Toda instead of shlamim. Rabbi Akiva says, fine, I'll agree with you that the heikesh is different, but still we have the words l'chayiyeh. So we had logical arguments, we had a heikesh, and then we had, in the end, this drasha l'chayiyeh. So in the end, it's not really learned out from the heikesh according to this. So now we have to wonder why they said there was a heikesh to shlamim. Well, that's the next section, the sugya. The Braita continues. Now, when they came and told this to Rabbi Yishmael, what Rabbi Akiva had said, that he had basically changed the heikesh, not to shlamim, but to toda. And then, we don't really care that he then added. Okay, we're not concerned here for bottom line at all. Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva have a fight now, an argument about this heikesh. Okay, and you're going to see from this chart that Rabbi Akiva basically says the heikesh is to the toda, and Rabbi Yishmael is going to say it's to the shlamim. And the Braita in the beginning that said it's shlamim is Rabbi Yishmael. Okay, so when Rabbi Yishmael hears this, Amar Lahem, Rabbi Akiva ta'ita. Someone's got to go tell Rabbi Akiva he made a mistake by changing his mind. So again, I want to remind you, it doesn't matter whether it's to toda or to shlamim. Either which way the conclusion is, right? Either because it's to shlamim, it's 2 days and a night, or it's to toda, but the words l'chayeh add that extra day. Okay, so either which way, you're going to have the same bottom line. It's just a matter of, is the heikesh to toda, it is to shlamim, and it's part of a broader issue, and that's why we're going to deal a lot with it for almost the rest of today. So he says ta'ita. Why did you ta'ita? Because he says, toda mehechan lemeda, mishlamim. How do we know at all the chazayat shuvah and shoki yamin are a law by toda? Because when it introduces the korban toda in the Gemara, in the Torah, it says, Vayikra, chapter 7, verse 11, Zo Torah Zevach HaShlamim. These are the rules for the shlamim, Asher Yakriv LaHashem, that you're going to sacrifice to God. Im al Toda Yakrivenu, if you bring it as a Toda, if you bring a Thanksgiving offering, which is a type of shlamim. Anyway, the point being here, shlamim is juxtaposed next to Toda. Okay, they're one pasuk apart from each other. From there's a heikesh, and we learn that the laws of shlamim, for example, the chazeh and the shok are given to the kohen in shlamim and also in a toda. So the whole law of chazeh nufa is learned by heikesh. Why is that important? He says, "V'chi davar lamed heikesh." Remember all this? Choseru melamed heikesh. Now, what did we do? We learned from a heikesh in this pasuk. Psaram yelecha kechazeh tufa keshok yamin. Now, the law of chazeh nufa u'shok yamin is learned by heikesh, that it's relevant to toda. And now you want to learn, so there's a heikesh, the toda also has chazeh tufa and shok yamin, and then we're going to do a heikesh from there to bechor, that it's 1 day. So he says, how could you do that? Can't be choser u'lamei heikesh. You can't have a heikesh on a heikesh. So he says, no way can you do that. And therefore, if it's not going to be the toda, it must be the shlamim, where chazeh and shok are directly learned out, not by heikesh, and then we can get from there to the law for the bechor. So he says, and therefore, and therefore go back to what you originally said, that the heikesh is to shlamim and not to toda. Okay, go by your lashon rishon, the first thing you said, not by the second thing you said. Now we're going to have to figure out how can Rabbi Akiva do a heikesh on a heikesh. But before we get there, we're going to go back and forth here. So Rabbi Yishmael, if he didn't need the words l'chayiyeh then to add the extra day, because he thinks you already get the 2 days and a night from the shlamim. So what does he do with the words l'chayiyeh? We're going to have a drop of ping pong here. My avidle limeda b'chor ba'almum shuma tana lekohen shalom atzinu b'chol Torah. If the b'chor gets blemished, now what might you have thought? It doesn't say in the Torah what you do with a b'chor that's blemished. All it says is your firstborn animal goes to that, gets sacrificed in the temple, and the meat goes to the kohen. But what if it has a blemish and it can't be sacrificed? You might think, maybe I get to keep it. But no, you have to give it to the kohen. Now, how do you know that? Because it says l'chayiyeh. There's an additional thing that goes to the kohen, and from there they say that must be talking about a ba'almum. Okay, well now we're going to have a problem, because where's Rabbi Akiva going to learn that halacha? Rabbi Akiva yalef leimi bisaram chad tam chad ba'almum. It says bisaram yelechad, their meat in plural. What kind of meat is plural here? It's bechor. That's one thing. What's bisaram? It must be tam and mum. One that doesn't have a blemish and one that does have a blemish. Both of them go to the kohen. Okay, Rabbi Yishmael mi bisaram. What does he do with that? Bisaram dehanach bechoro kamar. Well, it said in the pasuk bechor shol, bechor kesed, bechor ez. It listed three different types of firstborn animals. So when it says their meat, it meant the meat of the ox, the meat of the meat of the ace, okay, the sheep, the goat. It meant plural of that. It didn't mean anything specifically unique, and we're done with the ping pong. But now the Gemara says, "B'mai kami palge." What's the root of the machloket between them? And what they're really asking is, how did Rabbi Akiva do it to the Toda if it's a heikesh on a heikesh? Again, I just want to be very clear. The fact that chazat, shnufa, and shoki yamin are gifts that are given to the kohen in a korban toda are learned by a heikesh from shlamim, toda to shlamim. And then we're going to say this pasuk, right? So the chazat, shnufa, and shoki yamin are learned that it has to do with the toda by heikesh. And then we're going to make a heikesh from there to b'saram yelecha to learn what? Now, not that the chazan and shnufa and a bechor go to the kohen, the whole thing goes to the kohen. But what's it coming to teach you? That it has the same criteria as a toda, which is a toda can be eaten for 1 day and a night, also the bechor eaten for 1 day and a night. Now, that's not exactly a classic heikesh al heikesh, and we're going to exactly classify it right now. Mar savar hemenu v'davar acher have heikesh, umar savar lo have heikesh. The question is this a heikesh or not? Is this a heikesh on a heikesh? Why not? Because part of this law, the chazat, shnufa, and shoki yamin are relevant for toda, is a heikesh. That's learned out from shlamim. But what are we trying to learn from there to bechor? We're trying to learn the amount of time you can eat a korban toda to learn from there to the bechor. Now, the amount of time you can eat a korban toda is specifically written in the pasuk. Here you have it. Ubasar zevach todat shlamav in Vayikra chapter 7, verse 15. B'yom korbano ye'achel, on the day you bring the korban, eat it. Lo yaniach mimenu aboker, don't leave it for the morning. So that's written explicitly. So now we have two things. One is learned out by heikesh. Chazeh v'shok is relevant to toda. One is learned out explicitly, which is a toda can be eaten for a day and a night. And those two together, we wanted the combination of the two we're using to learn to bechor. Ubesaram yelecha, since it's compared to chazeh v'shok, which is relevant for toda, even though that was learned by heikesh, but we want to learn the din that's explicitly written in korban toda, which is you have a day and a night to the bechor. So it's tehemenu v'davar acher, we call it. It's heikesh, but also something else. So if there's something written explicitly and there's something written by heikesh, and we want to use the combination of the two and learn something else, Rabbi Akiva says that's not a heikesh. So therefore, you can take the tehemenu v'davar acher, the heikesh and davar acher. You don't really call that a heikesh because it's got something else with it. So you actually can learn from there to something else, whereas Rabbi Yishmael says you can't. Okay? Rabbi Yishmael calls that a heikesh when it means it is a heikesh. If it's a heikesh, well, then you can't learn from there to something else. Because you can't do a heikesh on a heikesh. So what we're going to do at this point is we're now going to take two different sugyot where we're going to basically say these seem to be learned by a heikesh and davar achel, and then a heikesh on that. And how's Rabbi Yishmael going to explain this? Because he thinks that shouldn't work. Okay? And then we're going to have some answers for each of them. So bishlam alaman damar lo have a heikesh. If you say this isn't a heikesh, meaning if it's not a heikesh, you can learn a heikesh from it because it's not called a heikesh. Hainu dichti b'chein yaseh la'ol moed. Okay, let's do some background. On Yom Kippur, what do you have to do? You take the blood of the bull and the goat, right? And you sprinkle it. Achat lamala, sheva lamata, right? 1 up, 7 down of the bull. Then you do 1 up, 7 down of the goat, all in the Kodesh Kodeshim. Then the Kohen Gadol does that. Then the Kohen Gadol goes to the Heichal and does the exact same thing outside. Where does this come from? Vayikra chapter 16, verses 14 to 16. Okay? And it says, take the damapar. Now we're going to see. Some of this is written explicitly. The fact that there's 7 above, 7 below, 1 above, 7 below. Some of it's written explicitly, right, for the bull and for the goat. And some of it is learned out by heikesh. And then there's going to be a heikesh from the ones that are done inside to the ones done outside. Okay, and that's the chen yaseh la'ol moed. Maybe we'll start with that. Whatever's done inside, it then just says v'chein yaseh la'ol moed. Do the exact same thing outside. So that's heikesh. That's the second heikesh we're going to do. The question is, what about the first part? So basically, we have the number of sprinklings up inside, the number of sprinklings down inside, and we have the bull and we have the goat. So it says in the pasuk, take from the damapar, from the bull, v'hizah be'etz ba'ol pnei kaporet. Go inside the Kodesh Kodeshim, toward the kaporet, which is the covering of the aron, sprinkle with your finger. Never says how many. And then it says, and before the kaporet, so al pnei kaporet is the up one, Lifnei kapora, before the kapora, it's 7 times. So there you have a number of how many times after of down. You don't have a number of how many times up. Then it says take the goat, and it says asad damo kasher saladama par. There's the connector heikesh pasuk. These two are the same, okay? So there's a heikesh from one to the other. And what are we being mekish? Whatever's missing. So notice what it says here. Hiza oto ala kaporet v'lifnei kaporet. Sprinkle it on the kaporet and before the kaporet. That means up and down. Now, notice what it says. Hiza oto. Oto ala kaporet means it, meaning singular. So what do we have? By the bull, we have the 7 that go the lamata. On the goat, we have 1 that goes lamala. And then we have asat damo kasher asala damapal, hekesh. So if you look at this chart, the par, we learn the how many lamala, we learn it from the other one. Just like the other one is 1, by this year it says it explicitly. By the par it doesn't, but we learn by hekesh. How many lamata? Well, by the par it says explicitly 7. By the seer it doesn't say, so we learn it from the hekesh. So how many bloods are done, lamala and lamata, in the Kodesh Kodashim is learned both by hekesh and explicitly. Then it says v'chein yaseh la'ol moed, which is hekesh, from there to outside. So that's basically a hekesh on a hekesh and davar acher. So, right, because now what do we do outside in the heichal? We do exactly the same. 1 up, 7 below of each, the par and the seir. So that's what we're going to say here. So if you say it's what's learned out explicit, if it's learned explicitly and by hekesh, which is the number of hazaot, sprinklings you do inside the Kodesh Kodashim of the bull and the goat, it's not a hekesh, then that makes perfect sense that we can learn v'chein yaseh la'ol moed. We can make another hekesh here. Hainu dechtiv v'chein yaseh la'ol moed. Shem shemazeh lefanav lefnim echad lamala v'sheva lamata midam apal. Kach mazeh be'echal, u'kshem shel fanav lefnim echad lamala v'echad lamata midam asir. Kach mazeh be'echal. That exactly what you do above and exactly what you do below. Inside, it's exactly what you do outside because the first thing isn't really called a hekesh. But ela lemanda amar have hekesh. But according to Rabbi Yishmael, who says this is a hekesh, ma'ikal, what can you say here? Okay, going back to the top chart on the sheet, on the second side of the page. Mikomo. So we're going to have 2 possible answers. Mikomotu degamre mehadade. So now we're going to say, we're actually, according to Rabbi Yishmael, you view these as 2 different things. One is location, and the other is how many sprinklings you do. But basically, okay, and it's a little hard to follow exactly how to say this clearly and what exactly it means here. But this isn't called a hekesh on a hekesh, because one is talking about how many sprinklings, and the other is talking about where you do it. So it's not really a hekesh on a hekesh because they're 2 different topics. One is where you, which is do it in all moed, just like you did it inside. And then you can learn everything what you did inside because it's not really that, even though that was a hekesh, we can still do it. Okay, the asad tamo hekesh is korbanot. So we have one hekesh which has to do with location, one which has to do with korbanot, meaning the sprinkling of the blood. So it's not a hekesh on a hekesh because they're 2 different topics. Ibai dema, turning out on a bed, chutz mipnim bechad zim negamar. Look, there's all sorts of things they did inside that they also do outside. And what they're basically saying is, it's not really a hekesh. It's just saying everything done outside, you also do it. Everything done inside, you also do outside. And we don't really view this as a hekesh on a hekesh. Okay, it's not the most convincing answer, but he somehow gets around explaining why it's not really a hekesh on a hekesh here. Or a hekesh, v'heimenu v'dvar, right, hekesh, and something else on a hekesh, and then another hekesh. Okay, next halacha. Now we're going to the loaves of the korban toda. Okay, by the time we finish Zevachim and Menachot, you'll really have this all down pat. But with the korban toda, which was an animal, you want to bring a Thanksgiving offering, you also bring 40 loaves. 10 are chametz, 30 are matzah. So now, the first thing you need to know, okay, we're going further down on the sheet. So I brought this, it doesn't say this all inside, so we're going to learn it outside. It doesn't say how many loaves you're supposed to bring. You're supposed to bring 40, but we're going to see right now where we learn it. It says that from each type that you're supposed to bring, in chapter 7, Pasuk 14, it says, Hikriv mimenu echad mikol korban truma l'Hashem. You need to bring one from each type as a truma l'Hashem, and we assume a whole one. Now, in Bamidbar Yuchet, it says, also the word trumat Hashem, when it's talking about maaser, the tithe that you're supposed to give to the Levites is maaser. Now, how much is maaser there? It's a tenth. So they learn that here it must also be a tenth. So if you're giving one loaf of each type to the kohen, that must mean there's 40 loaves because it's one out of every 10. So it's one out of every type, and it must be 1/10. So basically, there must be 10 loaves. Okay, that's number one. We get to 10 loaves, and that's learned from Gzera Shava. In this part of the Gemara, we're going to view a Gzera Shava as if it's written explicitly. It's not a heikesh. Okay, so now the fact that you need 10 loaves for everything, okay, for each type, is right. There's three types of matzahs, and there's one type of chametz. Right, the three types of matzah means they're prepared in different ways. Matzah just means it doesn't, it doesn't leaven. Doesn't mean like a flat piece of matzah. It's just most mincha offerings are unleavened. There's only one that's not. There's two. There's the lechmei todah and there's the shtei alechem. Now, it doesn't tell you how much solet, which is the fine flour they use to make the loaves, has to be in each one. So that's learned out from the shtei halechem on Shavuot. So we're going to read that inside. We don't view this as a heikesh. Hainu dichtiv again. Rabbi Akiva is going to make a lot more sense because it says mimoshvotechem taviu lechem tnufa she'ein Talmud lomar taviu. Okay, it says bring from your places, from where you live, lechem tnufa shtayim. Bring a bread offering. Shnei esronim solet, 2/10 of an ephah of solet. Okay, it's a measurement. How much flour? Now of the solet, fine flour. Now it says you don't really need the word taviu. You could have understood the pasuk without that word. Why does it say matom lomar taviu? Kol shatam ivi mimakom achil hareyu kazeh. Anything else that's like this is going to be like this. Meaning, what else is like this? The lachmei todah. The chametz part of the bread offerings for the lachmei todah, those 10 loaves, are going to be the same. Meaning, ma lahalani saron lechala, afkani saron lechala. So here's a heikesh in the pasuk because it mentions taviu, which they assume means it's a reference to the lachmei todah, the lechem, right, the loaves there. And this is 2 esronim for 2 loaves. So what does that mean? Each loaf in the shtei alechem on Shavuot that you bring is 1 isaron, 1/10 of an ephah. So therefore also each of these breads are 1/10 of an ephah. So now you have 10 of them, 10 esronim, okay? Because, right, 2 esronim, so you're going to have, 10/10 of an ephah, okay, which is 1 ephah basically. So now that's how we learn. That's the first heikesh. Here's a heikesh from the shtei alechem. So how do we know how many breads and how many esronim altogether? We learn it from first we had to get the Gzera Shava that told us there were 10 loaves. And now we know it's 1 isaron per loaf, so 10/10 of an ephah altogether for all 10 loaves. Now, lamanu asara lechametz, asara lematzah minayin. How do we know you need 10 for the matzah? And how do you know, basically what we're going to say is, what we mean here is not 10 loaves, 10 esronim. Now, there's 10 of the chametz and 30 of the matzah. What's going to be in this lechem todah is there's 10 esronim of solet for the 10 breads, the chametz ones, and that same amount you're going to make 30 loaves of matzah out of that same 10 esronim. So all the 30 loaves of matzah, each one's going to be obviously a third of the size of the lechem ones, are all together going to be 10 esronim, and that's going to be learned out from this heikesh. So we're going to have a heikesh on a heikesh and a Gzera Shava. Okay? So that's what we learn. Al chalot lechem chametz. Neged chametz have matzah. So that's what they're saying, right? You have chametz, and exactly that same amount are going to be used for all the matzahs, all the 30. Okay, so that only works according to Rabbi Akiva, because he's going to say the fact that you learn the first part from Gzera Shava and a heikesh, so that doesn't mean it's heikesh, and therefore you can make a heikesh from there to the matzot. But if you won't do a heikesh on a heikesh, and you think that first part is the Gzera Shava and heikesh together means heikesh, then you're not going to be able to do it. So as Rabbi Yishmael explained, he just says very simply, taviu yeterehi. It's not a heikesh. The word taviu is just including, it's an extra word. That means we're going to learn from there that the lachmei todah are the same, but not through a heikesh. It's not because it's a juxtaposition. It's just a drasha. And then once it's a drasha, well, you can learn from that. You can make a heikesh on that. And that's the end of that discussion. Okay? So let's finish up and then we'll do a quick review. Pesach eino ne'echal. So now the Gemara, the Mishnah had said, Pesach is only eaten till chatzot. We're now on the last topic for now. We're going to finish this chapter. Pesach can be eaten only till chatzot and at night. Okay, meaning as opposed to other korbanot where you can eat them during the day and the night, this one only at night and until midnight. Now, all the others that can be eaten day and night also are only till midnight, but this one obviously is different. We're going to see. So Man Tanu is the Tanu. Says this, Rav Yosef, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Tanya. There's a machlokes about this. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Omer, Ne'amal kam balayla hazeh, v'ne'amar avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim balayla hazeh. Okay, it says in the pasuk, and it says, Ve'achlu et habasal balayla hazeh. You're going to eat the meat this night. And it says, I went in there, it's Mitzrayim, balayla hazeh, God killing the bechorim. And that was until chatzot, malalan al chatzot, afkan al chatzot. That was until midnight. Therefore, you eat this also till midnight. K'zeh Rashava. Amar Rabbi Akiva, v'lo kvar ne'emar, v'achaltem oto b'chipazon. So you're supposed to eat them b'chipazon. What is chipazon? Ad sha'ad chipazon. Now, what happened? It's until the hour where they rushed to leave. When did they rush to leave? In the morning. God told them, don't go out until the morning. And what's the morning? Well, the earliest time is dawn. So basically, you have until dawn. So what does Rabbi Akiva do with that night? Well, you might think, we sacrifice it when? On the 14th during the day. So maybe this is like all other sacrifices. You can eat it during the day and you can eat it at night, right? Day and night. Comes Balayla according to Rabbi Akiva to say not that it's limiting you to until midnight, it's that you can't eat it during the day. You can only eat it at night. You can't eat it the day that you sacrifice it. You have to wait till nighttime to eat it. So now they say, right, Balayla yenechal and yenechal b'yom. Amarle Abayu, my Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah doraita. Dilma derabanu l'archit me'avera. He says, wait a minute. Why are you assuming that this is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah when it said al chatzot, and it means it has to be eaten until midnight, as opposed to maybe it's just like all the other korbanot. You really have till the morning, but eat them till midnight. Remember, that's what we said with all the korbanot. All the ones can be eaten for a day and night. You should ideally eat them by midnight so you don't forget. But not that it's a Torah law, to which they say, no, clearly that's not what the Mishnah is saying, because in came my ela al chatzot, ela kihata, mahatam doraita, afkan nami doraita. So first of all, in all the other Mishnah, it said you can eat it until chatzot. This one says you can't eat it except until chatzot. And then it said you can't eat it except for those who registered. You can't eat it except for roasted. Now, all those are doraita, and therefore this is also doraita. And that's why this must be Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. And with that, Hadran alaf ezu mekoman. We finished the chapter. So what did we do today? We started with this, the fact that it's over the yesod, like the ola, but it's not completely like the ola because it's only one matana. This is the bechor and the maaser and the Pesach. It's only one matana because the word saviv doesn't appear there, and the word saviv appears in a bunch of places, so we can't build it as a paradigm. Then we got to this whole thing about how many days do you have to eat the bechor? 2 days and a night. We started with this braita, with making a heikesh to shlamim. Then we went backwards kind of thing and said, wait, Rabbi Tarfon had this whole logical argument. Rabbi Yosi Hagelili said, wow, maybe we should compare it to chata. They went back and forth, argued logic. Came Rabbi Akiva in place of Rabbi Tarfon and said, no, it's a heikesh to shlamim. Came Rabbi Yosi said, what do you mean? Make the heikesh to toda. And Rabbi Akiva said, you're right, but l'chayya adds the extra day. Came Rabbi Yishmael and said, why'd you say he was right? How could you do it to toda? You can't do it to toda. The whole toda din by shok and chazeh was learned from a heikesh, and you're doing a heikesh on a heikesh. To which the Gemara then, after going to a little back and forth between them, said, wait, there really is an argument between them, and it's based on, this isn't a classic heikesh, because it's a heikesh and davar achir, because it's got the heikesh of the chazeh and shok. It also has the davar achir of the time, and that's written explicitly. We have the time of a toda is written explicitly. So we have two parts of it. There's a heikesh and something written explicitly, and we want to learn a heikesh from there. And that's the machlok. Can you do that or not? From there, we took two other cases where there was a heikesh and something else, something either written explicitly or learned by Gzeira Shava, and they wanted to do another heikesh. We said that seems much more intuitively like Rabbi Akiva. How do we explain it according to Rabbi Yishmael? And we came up with explanations how we could do that, because he just didn't view it as a heikesh. We had to kind of say it's not really a heikesh on a heikesh there. And then we ended with this machloket about Pesach, is nechal ad chatzot or nechal until the morning, and we saw the machloket where they got it from in the psukim. With that, we finished for today and finished our chapter. I hope now you have, and if you look back at all we've done so far in Zevachim, you should be proud of all the different things that you've learned that you might not have known a lot of these things before. We now have the framework, all about the machshava and what pigul and all that is, and the whole seriousness of importance of machshava in the temple. And now we got all the details of the different korbanot and how it actually works, the inner workings of the temple, where they were done, what they did, how they did them, all the different methods. And if you always wonder what's zrika, there's all, now we learned there's all different ways of sprinkling the blood. Again, it's very hard to sprinkling, throwing, pouring, right? Placing, squeezing. There's all different methods of doing it. And we saw which ones were done for which korbanot. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.